Last time we discussed about taxes, and we started the topic of taxes on emissions. We will quickly review that part. So the idea is setting an emission, a tax, unit tax on emissions, like H, so the firms pay H times E. Firms can reduce the emissions. So firms has to choose between reducing emissions and paying taxes. And so reducing emission is named abatement. Okay, firms abate. And so they can pay less taxes or abate. And we defined the total abatement cost. And hence we have the idea that firms want to minimize the sum of total abatement cost and tax paid. Hence, we can rewrite this equation in terms of, for instance, abatement or emissions, just replacing substituting the value of final emissions, which is initial emission minus abatement. Hence, so we can minimize the sum and we get the marginal abatement cost must be equal to H, the emission tax, okay? And the higher the tax, the higher the abatement. What are the virtues of the system is that firms can decide what to do. So this case is good when firms are heterogeneous, are different. So firms can play in the role they prefer. And we did also, this was a slide in Italian, which is the same, so you can learn some Italian. And we did an example. For instance, for total abatement cost, we can calculate the marginal abatement cost. And if the tax is 7.5, the optimal abatement for this firm is 5. And if firms are different among them, are heterogeneous, then taxes are cost effective. What does it mean, cost effectiveness? That the total amount of the costs of the firms is minimized. We want to get a target, and we want to not to have an excess, too high costs on the firms. And so if we have two firms, and we want to get a target, which is minimum abatement. The government wants also to minimize the sum of the total abatement cost of the firm 1 and the firm 2. In this example, we assume that there are only two firms. Hence, we can combine the two and express everything in terms of firm 1. And we get this condition, that is the marginal abatement cost must be equal for all the firms, which is true also for the general case of many firms. In case of two firms, we can also draw a nice picture, which is interesting because we draw here on a standard picture the abatement of firm 1, but we can add an axis that goes from right to left and draw the marginal abatement cost of firm 2 in the other direction. Is it clear to everyone? And so we can easily find the point at which the marginal costs are the same, and the marginal costs are the same if the abatement of firm 1 is A1S, and correspondingly the abatement of firm 2 is from O2 to A1S. That's clear? Is it clear to everyone? The idea is to put a tax such that if we put a tax on emissions, everyone will answer by setting an abatement level, and we want that the sum of the abatement level be equal to the target of the government. We say that taxes are better in terms of cost effectiveness as compared to standard. If we want to measure the total cost for firm 1, total abatement cost, it is simply the area OA1B. This triangle is the cost for firm 1. The other triangle is a cost for firm 2. Then if the government fixes a tax equal to T or H or whatever, the star, this will be the amount chosen by the two firms. And so the sum of the abatement cost is a blue area. Suppose that we have a standard, and because of the standard, firm 1 abatement is only this segment from O to A1S, and firm 2 abatement is this red line, and hence we have that the total cost for firm 2 is this red triangle, while for firm 1 is this, this violet one. Okay, this is a cost, abatement cost for the two firms, and clearly the sum of the cost in this case, which is the case of standard of command and control, and of course the costs are higher than with the tax. Okay, we have this orange area that is an excess cost. It is this triangle HDB is the aggregate loss that we have from the standard. It is cheaper to use a standard. For one firm, standard is better, because for firm A, in this case, the firm 1 abatement cost is lower than the case of taxes. But at the same time, when we use taxes, as we saw here, the one firm, in this case, pay a lot of abatement costs, but very few taxes. And the other one, the one that does not abate or abate a lower quantity, pays more taxes. So the idea is this one. You prefer paying taxes or to abate? And to which extent? So firms are free to choose according to the technology that they have. The problems of this approach, that we need to know the marginal abatement cost, because we don't know how the firms answer. Okay? Is it clear the mechanism? The mechanism is simply, I put a price, in this case H, and then I expect an answer from the firm. I expect that A1 and A2, because of this price, of this tax, of this economic incentive. Hence, I hope that the total abatement, that the sum of the abatement is equal to the target. We called it minimum, A min. Okay, this is the way how price incentives work, economic incentive works, the price incentives. I give a signal as a regulatory authority, I put prices, I put taxes, and then firms react. So the crucial issue is here, is that the government need to understand and to make an expectation about what the response will be. And this is a difference between standard and taxes. When the government set a standard, they directly set the quantity, and perhaps there are some problems in terms of efficiency, economic efficiency. With taxes, we set a price here, and then we have a quantitative answer from the firm, which we don't know if it is the desired response from the government. Suppose that the two lines that just appeared, the dotted lines, are the estimated abatement cost, estimated by the government. If those are the estimates, what will the amount of of taxation, H, that the government will choose? What will the level of taxation be? In the point at where the two marginal costs are the same. Is it clear? The government will set a taxation, a tax H, such that when the two marginal abatement costs are the same, the response will be the desired target. If we put this level of taxation, we as a government expect that firm 1 will abate this A1, okay? Firm 2 will abate this other amount, okay? And then the total amount is the target. So we hope that firms will meet the target. But we are wrong. What will occur if we put the taxation at H level? What will be the true response from the firms? Now, so what will be the true response? How much will the abatement of firms 1 be? What is the rule that the firm follows? The marginal abatement cost must be equal to H, to the tax. Hence, for firm 1, we will get here, in this point, where the H is equal to the marginal abatement cost. Are you with me or not? And what will the abatement be of the second firm? We need just to check where the true marginal cost cross the taxation level. Is it fine? So as we can see, we decide taxation level equal to H. What is the response of the firms? It is not enough as compared to our target, because this is the abatement of firm 1, A1, and this is the abatement of firm 2. This is why I told you that it's very important you to understand this picture. Hence, since we had a bad expectation of the reaction of the firms, we don't get the target. In this case, we underestimated true marginal abatement cost. If we overestimate, the opposite will occur, because we will put the taxation at a too high level. Hence, the answer from the firm will be to abate a lot, much more than the desired target. Is it clear? So, this is a possible problem. The authority, regulatory authority, needs to know some information about the technology of the firms, which is not impossible. And actually, we know a lot about technologies. But in any case, it is we have some uncertainty. So one way to get over these problems are tradable permits, which are in theory very popular. And the idea is rather simple. Now suppose, now we write quickly a model, which is very similar to the one before. Suppose that firm needs some permits to pollute. And we go and we name these permits with the letter E. E are the permits that you need to have this amount of emissions. But permits can be traded on the market. Firm can, again, as in the taxation case, choose between abating and buying permits. Is it okay, clear? So they will minimize the total cost of abatement plus the price of the permits times emissions. As you can see, this is exactly the same as taxation. In this case, rather than H, we have P. But the model is exactly the same. What is the final level of emissions? It is E0, the initial level, minus the abatement. So we can substitute and get these objective functions that the firm minimize the total cost of abatement plus the price, plus the cost of buying the permits, from which we can get from the first order condition that marginal abatement cost is equal to price. The price of the permits must be equal to the marginal abatement cost. And following this kind of rule, the firm chooses the optimal level of abatement. The firm trades off between abating and paying the taxes. So, as you can see, the model is formally the same as for the emission taxes. However, what is the difference? The difference is that there are permits. If you don't have a permit, you cannot produce because you cannot emit. Okay? And then suppose that everyone has 10 permits. And there are 4 firms. What is the total amount of pollution? If 4 firms and 10 permits. What is the total amount of pollution, of course? Is 40. There are 4 firms, each can pollute up to a maximum of 10. So the total pollution cannot be bigger than 40. Okay? So each firm has some permits. 10 permits. They can use it, or they can sell it. So up to this is the same as standard. Because in the standard, in command and control, I just give to any firms the permit to emit. And then they cannot have emission higher than that. So the mechanism is, at the beginning, very similar. Each firm has an allowance, initial allowance, 10 tons of carbon. And they cannot go beyond. So in this respect, it is the same as a standard, because I don't care about the reaction of the firm. I know that as an authority, I decided a maximum level. And if I do control, of course, but this is a problem which is for any tools. So if the authority controls, then we know that we will get the target. This means effective. Please don't mix up efficiency and effectiveness. What is effectiveness? It's a capacity to get the target. Efficiency is something which is related on how we get the target. If we get at a minimum cost, for instance, or if we use our resources efficiently, it means that given our resources, we produce a maximum level of output. So efficiency is something about maximization. Effectiveness is about reaching the target. Okay? So we have seen that taxes need not to be effective. They are efficient, but need not to be effective. If you are not very good in predicting and knowing the marginal abatement cost, taxes will not be effective. They will not reach the target. So, but we have seen that under taxes, in general, firms have different level of abatement. So suppose this case of tradable permits. We have permits as in standard. Each firm, in this case, has an allowances of 10, but they can sell it. Okay, so suppose that they do the calculation and then we have, as in the previous case, and then one firm want to pollute for 14, another one for 13, another one for 9, another one for how much is it? And another one for 4. Okay, thank you. So we will have that this firm will buy 3 permits. So there will be a demand for permits from firm 1 of 3 permits. Another one will demand 4 units. At the same time, we have some firms that this firm needs 9, but they have 10. So they can sell 1, and this other firm can sell 6. So in this case, we have that demand is equal supply. But since this is a market, then the price can change, of course. Okay, we just build this example as an equilibrium example. Okay, but suppose that there is an excess of demand of permits. What will occur? That the price of permits will rise. Hence, the calculation of the firms will change here. Because the condition, the first order condition is price equal marginal cost of marginal abatement cost. Okay? So suppose that you have an excess of demand, and the price will rise. Okay? And then we know that the higher the price, the higher the abatement. So the demand for permits will decrease, and the supply of permits will increase. So in theory, if the authority is good enough to set the market for permits, we will have a very good mechanism. Is it clear? And the reason is that the mechanism is effective because it is similar to command and control. Each firm has allowances, maximum levels, but at the same time, they do not need to do the same. They are free to choose their optimal level of abatement. Okay? So, what is bad for the government? In the case of taxes, the government gets some fiscal revenue. The government gets the money from the taxes. We could also think of a tradable permit system where the initial allocation of the permits is given after a payment, is auctioned. In this case, the government also has a budget revenue, fiscal revenue from the emissions. Please stop me if I'm not clear. So ideally, this system is very good. Where are the problems in this system? Yes, please. Why is this system good only in theory? Where are the practical points in this system?
The moment when it's too many of those permits, the market is flooded, prices sink way under the
abatement, yeah.
So everybody would pollute more than they should, and when you said levels too low, then.
So the problems with tradable permits arises, as some of you somehow say, from institutional issues. we don't have a market for permits. So it is difficult to create a market from nothing, which is not nothing, because something exists already. Still producing firms exist. So it is, in some sense, it is very easy to create a market for a good that is not produced at all, from scrap, where nothing exists, rather than a case where something very important exists. So it is very difficult. So one issue, for instance, is the amount of permits. Because when we set a policy, firms will be affected and in general will be damaged. The reason why many firms prefer command and control is that actually they don't have to do almost nothing. Because they just the only thing that they have to do is just to be within the standard. And of course, there will be a lot of vested interest. Okay? Firms will try to do their best to affect the government in order to do nothing. If we put a constraint on the firm will lose competitiveness. The firms will become less competitive than firms in other countries, for instance. They will lose profits. So they will put a lot of pressure on the governments in order to get their permits for free, to get a huge amount of permits. And actually, this has occurred with the biggest trade system, which is the European Union of system for carbon, the EU ETS, emission trading schemes. The price in some period went almost to zero. Now the system is very complicated and so on, but the pressures for avoiding the intervention to be effective were very strong. And actually, I'm not saying that firms are not right in trying to avoid all these costs, because we have globalization and we have so many different issues. So the real issue is that the permits are usually given for free, and usually are given too many as respect to the target, and then the target will be not reached. And so there is this big problem of the emission allowance. How much shall I give? And some of you told, what is the target? What shall be the target? How do I decide the target? And this is the other problem. So far, we discussed the tools. Please don't confuse tools, deciding the tools and comparing the tools, and deciding the target. There are two completely different issues. However, they are linked, and they are presented as if they are the same in most of environmental textbooks. So free or auctioned, usually they are given as free as a proportion of the existing emissions of course, I'm giving a prize to the firms that emits more. If we follow this rule, we have a status quo, we have existing firms, and so how shall I give these permits? And this is rather paradoxical, because if a firm is not efficient at all, and they have very bad technology, very old technology, and they pollute a lot, they will get a lot of permits. Because usually we don't want to harm existing firms. So this is a very tricky issue. Of course, there is a best available technology and so on. But usually you don't want many people to get unemployed, because a lot of workers, maybe they will lose their work because some very inefficient firms, if we give a low level of permits to inefficient firms. So the matter is not only a matter of profits, but it's a matter of employment, workers, and so there are many people in the society that would like to avoid that, to give a price according to their emission efficiency. So this is somehow a problem. Of course, all the policies must be gradual. But at the same time, it is very, very tricky. It will be an advantage for existing firms. And actually, we assumed that firms want to sell the permits they don't need. But they could bank them. I need 5 permits. I have 10. If I sell them, I will get some revenue. However, if I don't sell them, what will occur? Yeah.
Maybe the demand rises, and so does the price, and then I can sell them for a higher price.
Yeah. And you?
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, we can have consideration about dynamic of prices. Maybe I can wait for the price to become higher. But actually, if I don't sell them, and the supply is lower, maybe the price will become higher. And there is also another reason. If I don't sell them, someone will not be able to produce. Someone will not be able to buy. So it's a kind of barrier to entry. It is a tool for reducing competition. I don't want to sell permits to my competitor, but perhaps. Yeah.
It looks like Kyoto Protocol or another protocol, I don't remember very well, more than 50, 100.
Creating a new market is difficult, and we said about the barriers to entry and windfall profits. Suppose I was given permits for free, then the price gets very high, and then I will get profit from nothing, windfall profits. Yes, please.
Is there a regulation today on this?
There are different systems of permits. The biggest one is the European ETS, emission trading systems, and it is regulated. It will soon enter a new phases, and actually they will limit the issue of banking. Firms will not be allowed to bank the permits unless, and then there will be a reserve mechanism such that, so it is not an absolute limit, this stuff of banking, but it will depend on the market conditions. And if you can find all the information on the website of the European Union, where you have also short presentation of the system, describing all the different phases, and then you have also very, very big documents, and you can deepen the topic at any level. My suggestion is to have a look to this website by a colleague, who is Clive Spash, who is very critical of the tradable permits, and is very clever, and there are very interesting arguments, very much on the line of what we said. Now, we change topic in a sense. We move to choosing the target. Probably many of you already have an idea of how economists propose to choose a target. And we go back to Pigou. He brought a book, Wealth for Economics, in 1920, and in few pages, this is a big book with a lot of pages, and there is a small paragraph on telling about this idea of externalities. Market fails because of externalities, and this is taught in macroeconomic courses, in public economics courses, and so on. And what is the basic idea? As you probably know, you have a demand and supply for a good, and the supply is derived from somehow related to the marginal cost. However, we know that, so here we have the market equilibrium. We know that due to externalities, which are side effects of production, this is not the true marginal cost, because we have another cost if we consider also the social marginal cost, if we consider externalities. Given for producing this quantity, the true cost is not this one, because this is only the private marginal cost. We have also some social costs deriving from the pollution for producing this good. And suppose that we calculate that this blue line are the social marginal cost. Then the true cost of producing this quantity Q, the true marginal cost, is not this one, but this one. Okay? So the market equilibrium is delivering too much of the good. If we consider the true marginal cost, that is the sum of private marginal cost and social marginal cost, we get this blue dot, which is the social optimum. So the target from an economic point of view should be Q star. And the reason is that in Q star, consumers pay a price which is equal to the cost that was needed to produce that quantity of good. So the idea is rather simple, is to calculate the social cost, to assess the social cost, and then to choose the target according to those social costs. And this is a social optimum. We produce too much of that good, and the reason is that we do a wrong accountancy. We forget to include in the cost also the side effects on the production, the costs which are not paid by the producer. And we can do a similar picture, drawing marginal abatement cost and marginal damages, marginal social costs. And we can find the optimal level of emissions. Just balancing marginal abatement cost and marginal social damages. You probably have already seen similar pictures. So the idea is how do I choose my target? I want this level of emissions where we have a balance between abatement cost and social costs. Of course, we have the problem to estimate these two curves. The marginal abatement cost, we discussed a bit on that. Of course, it is difficult but not impossible to know about technologies, available technologies. It is more difficult to estimate social damages. And we will discuss this later. As we have seen, we can have the idea of emission fees, taxes. So to get an answer equal to H star. So in ideal economic systems, goods worth more than they cost to produce Goods worth less than they cost to produce do not. Okay? So we produce only goods which are worth to be produced. This is efficiency. Economic efficiency. In a perfectly competitive property system, producers, it's better to read together this one. I leave for you to read. And this is actually the idea of equating price and marginal costs. Okay? I produce a good if it is worth more than it costs to produce. And what if a good is worth less than it costs to produce? Goods is not produced. Okay? So the idea is that there are some goods that should not be produced. And so if we add the social marginal cost to our accounting, then maybe some goods who are produced are not produced anymore. So the idea is that so the idea works if producers pay all of the costs associated with production. Actually, it is not true. Because there are some goods which are used for free, and for instance, clean air. But the firms don't pay for clean air. And so they suppose they do a damage of $10 worth of bed melts, sore throats, corrosion on people downwind, and so on. But they don't pay for this damage. Since they don't pay for these costs, they will not include in the calculation, and then they will produce too much steel. So this is a standard idea. The result is inefficient. Too much. Some goods may be produced even though their cost, including the resulting pollution, is greater than their value. Of course, it is inefficient in another respect as well. And then in this slide, you will find something about pollution control, about abatement cost. It is said exactly the same as before, but in this case it is referred to the abatement. Since firms do not pay for the damage that they do to the society, then they decide not to abate. If they were made to pay for them, they would abate or not produce. So in a sense, as you can see here, inefficiently low level of pollution control. So we can see both sides. We can see that production is too high, or we can see that the abatement is too low, or the control or the way you produce is too polluting. You use processes which are very polluting because in this way you save costs. So to sum up, we have 4 tools: command and control, emission fees, and so we saw the first 2, and now we have a third one: property rights, better definition of property rights. And we don't see, but as you know, there are several voluntary schemes. That is, for instance, corporate social responsibility. There is a mistake here, a typo. And why do we can so we said that we need to separate the tools and targets. But actually in environmental economics books, they are put together. They are mixed. They are not very well distinguished. And the reason is that, of course, direct regulation, the problem of the target is not tackled. But for taxes, usually the economists suggest to use Pigouvian taxes, that is to choose the taxes equal to the marginal, the social marginal costs. So it is not just an environmental taxes, but the idea is to shift the supply curve by an amount which is equal to the social marginal costs. And so in a sense it is linked. We economists, we mix the 2 concepts together, but we need to separate. For instance, the government can charge a steel company for the damage done by its pollution of $10 per pound. By doing so, it converts the external cost into an internal cost. Internalization of the externalities. The magic words in economics and environmental economics. Hence, the firm will take into account the tax and will reduce the amount of steel or abate more. I had a kind of exercise here. Try to read this and find the mistake. So first system is about abatement costs and how much the firm will abate. And hence, as we saw before, of course, the firms in this case can decide how much producing and how to produce the goods. And what about this sentence? Is this true? What does it mean? Why? What's about? This is about the cost, the social costs. So we need to estimate which the social costs are. Fine. So this is true. Hence, we have only one sentence, which is wrong, and why?
Efficient.
Yeah, of course, yeah. We need also to estimate what is the cost of preventing pollution. We talk about abatement cost, and so if we don't know which the reaction of the firm will be, how can we get an efficient target? Okay, so it is. Of course, direct regulation is different from setting taxes. But in any case, the government needs to measure the cost of preventing pollution, the private cost of abatement. This is true that will be done by the steel company acting in its own interest, and this is referred to the choice between how much to abate, how to change the production processes, and so on. So you have always to be very careful about what we read. So at least it's ambiguous. It is not very clear what this author wanted to say. Again, the issue of the targets and the issue of tools are put together by Ronald Coase, by this different approach. And the idea is the government always fails because information is in the individuals, is in the firms. The governments and authorities do not have information. So according to this school of thought, the environmental problems come from a wrong and ill definition of the property rights. Who has the right on air? Can the firms use air or not? So according to this school of thoughts, the things are simple. We need to define property rights. We need to say the air is of the local community. The air is of the national governments. The air is of the firms. Once we have defined the property rights, then people will bargain, will sell and buy their property rights, somehow similar to tradable permits. Okay, and actually tradable permits are inspired by this school of thought. And the master of this school was Ronald Coase, who got a Nobel Prize for Economics in 1991, and he was born in 1910 and died at 103 years, and he was in the University of Chicago. Actually, he got the Nobel Prize for another paper which was written in 1937 about the nature of the firm, but hopefully, no, sorry. The paper I was referring to is this one, The Problem of Social Cost. It was published in 1960, and as you can see, I use now Google Scholar. As you can see, this paper had more than 30,000 of citations, which is a huge number. It was heavily criticized, but also praised. And it was very, very much influential. And it is not technical. you can read it very easily, and somehow is okay. So you will all the examples in the paper are very simple and are not very realistic. It's just that if I do a damage to another person, but usually reality is very much complicated. You have a lot of relationships. For instance, just to have this will work. For instance, I have this subject that has an externality on this other subject, and then they can bargain. But suppose that here I have a firm, a plant, polluting a lot, and then here I have a big city with lot of citizens. Many citizens, okay? Who will bargain? Here I have a CEO, one person, and here I have a big town, 1 million of people. And probably the major will bargain with this firm. Who has the right to pay? And how much will the city will be available to pay the firm to reduce emissions? Who knows? And how will the bargaining process work? Yeah.
I think the CEO is in the higher position as he's polluting, and he can say,
Yeah.
I can pollute more,
Yeah.
and then the city will have to pay more.
Yeah, but suppose that the right on the air is to the city, belongs to the city. And so the CEO must decide an amount to pay the city. In theory, we should collect all the willingness to accept of all citizens. How much would you like to get for the plant to produce this amount of pollution? And you, how many dollars, in theory? Then we should collect all these sum. In this case, we could have the problem of free riding. Suppose that that the firm has the right to pollute, and the citizens need to collect money in order to make an offer to the firm. And since the pollution is a public good, because air is public, maybe I am not willing to reveal my true willingness to pay, because I would free ride. In a sense, I will not declare because I think, I don't give any money because other citizens will pay for reducing externalities. Or maybe I'm willing to pay 20 euros, but I will only declare 5 euros because other will pay for reducing externality. So if everyone is doing like this, of course, the level will not be efficient because everyone will declare less. Okay, so if everyone declares less, then the optimal level of pollution will be not reached, because we collect some money and then we will give to the firm, and then the firm will abate, but only using not so much money, much less than we would desire as a citizens. So this is one problem. And another problem is that usually life is like this. We have this provoking this, and then we have this, and then we have this, and then we have this one. What is, and then we have another arrow here. And then we have another arrow here. And this is, suppose this is a damage. Who has the responsibility of this damage? Who will bargain with whom if reality is like this? For instance, we have synergies. For instance, suppose that you have, you have one firm polluting a river. You have a river here. One firm is polluting the river, but if only one firm with one kind of pollutant. But nothing special occurs. Suppose now there is another firm that pollutes with a different pollutant, and the two pollutants have a reaction between them, and all the fishes die. And the reason and the cause of fish dying, which is who has the responsibility for the fishes? A or B? Who knows? Because if A alone pollutes, nothing occurs. If B alone pollutes, nothing occurs. If they both pollute, a disaster occurs here. No? Yeah.
Are they allowed to pollute in the beginning?
Yeah, in the beginning, because the law allows you to pollute, to put in the river some waste. And your substance is not toxic. And another one has another substance which is not toxic. But if they react together, they become toxic for the fishes. So even in theory, we don't know how to solve the problem. And this is very easy case. Who will bargain? Okay? And so reality is much, much more complex than the simple cases that are used for proposing the property right idea. Okay? And this guy, you have to read one paper written by myself about this guy, who was strongly critical. And the idea is about incommensurability. It's about measuring social costs. Social costs are very complex. And they are heterogeneous. They are very different among them. We have complex interdependencies, and according to CAP and many others, it is impossible to measure them with a unique unit of measurement. Okay? Because you can talk about fishes, you can talk about people, maybe you have... so the issue is that all the social costs are very different among them. Disruptive extra market flows. According to CAP, it is not sufficient to assign monetary values to these externalities. We have inside human beings, health, lives, and it is meaningless to measure with the same unit of measure these heterogeneous social costs. And externalities are systemic. Within economics, externalities are only side effects. However, according to CAP, they are everywhere. When we consume, when we produce, there are always side effects. And all these side effects are not controllable. We cannot isolate these side effects. And why? Because of competition. And actually, if we have a competitive system, the firms will try to shift their cost outside to the society. Because why? If firms don't try to shift their cost outside, they will perhaps go bankrupt, or they will lose competitiveness. So it is unavoidable that firms try to exploit labor force, to exploit the environment. So, and the view of CAP is simply that externalities and talking about externalities is not a good idea. And because the optimal level of pollution is a political decision. When we talk about the budget, the military expenses, where do we decide the amount of military expenses of the government? In the parliament or the prime minister? Now, has anyone asked you how much are you willing to pay for military expenses in our country? Did you experience this? Has anyone asked you how much would you pay for buying this very nice bomb? But this is military expenses, and military expenses are political decision. Why should economists tell the right level of environmental pollution, of pollution? And so we need, it is a matter of ethics, of politics, and of course science. Science can tell us about biological processes, ecological processes, or whatever, but all environmental decisions should be the same as all the other political decisions. So any attempt to assess the social cost and try to get the optimal level of water of emission is meaningless. It's meaningless because, for instance, we don't have the future generation. We don't have the poor. Because if we assess everything, asking people on the basis of how much are you willing to pay, of course, a poor person will not count. Future generation will not count. So, and also Georgescu Reagan, who we mentioned, is along these lines. And so this is a completely different perspective, which is focused on tools. Taxes are useful, permits are useful, maybe cohesion approach is useful or whatever, but a society has the right to decide which is the target. It cannot be left to technicians, to a technical decision. We talked about the safety limits, about Rockstrom and the paper by Rockstrom, about if we surpass some thresholds or not. So scientists can tell us which are the limits. Within the limits, the society is free to choose. And of course, we talk about ethics, because ethics is also about future generation and poor. I was very quick, but you can read all this stuff in the paper that I gave you as material. Thank you.